returning back to football here, TK on the stream says, what we were talking about earlier before John with the 4-man rush, he says it's also super adverse to an O-line psyche. If you're, as a group, are consistently getting beat, it takes a toll, which I think is a really good point. TK played offensive line in college, and that's a point that we don't think about a lot, like the mental wear and tear of just lining up every play. It's kind of the same thing with an effective running game, right, on a defensive line. If you're a defensive lineman and you know they're just running it down your throat every play and there's not a damn thing you can do about it, that's demoralizing, and that's going to break their spirit at some point. It's kind of the same thing with a 4-man pass rush on an offensive line. If you know that you've got an extra guy and their 4 guys that are beating your 5 on a consistent basis, that starts to creep in your head a little bit.
And I didn't play as high of offensive line as Thomas did here, but I look at it. There's 2 sides to it. One, you talk about the psyche on a defense of just running it down your throat.
Mm-hmm.
It's you as an offensive lineman walk up to the line of scrimmage. There's a different look in a defensive lineman's eyes whenever you have already racked up 125 yards in the ground and it's not even halftime.
Yep.
Like, there's a look in their eyes that lacks confidence or a little bit rattled. It's the same look whenever the defense is getting 4-man pressure, and you go back to the huddle and you look in your quarterback's eyes, and it's like that rattled look. If he no longer trusts what he's seeing, he knows he's about to get just absolutely demolished, smashed into the ground. It's that same look you see, and it's that confidence that these guys lose. Like, whenever a defensive line loses confidence against an offensive line, it takes bad to worse. It's what we're talking about with those 4 to 5 yard rushes in the first half become 10 to 15 yard rushes in the second half because of that demoralization factor. And it's the same thing where you look at a quarterback, whenever that 4-man pressure is getting home, those incompletions and those passes that get thrown away or turn into sacks in the first half turn into interceptions. They turn into pick sixes in the second half.
Turn into strip sacks and scoop, fumbles and that type of thing.
Because that quarterback has that lack of confidence look in their eyes in the offense, but specifically your offensive line. And as an offensive lineman, you go back there and you just feel bad. You're like, man.
Yeah, I mean, what do you even say? You're just like, sorry, And I also think, there's with the quarterback, which is a good point. There also is a desperation that starts because you're like, hey, I know I'm not going to have time. So you start to compromise on some of the stuff and you start to make decisions that you probably know aren't the best decision, but you feel like you have to. Your risk tolerance in that situation has to go way up because you're like, otherwise I'm just not even going to get the ball out. You're like, if I don't get the ball out, we're definitely going to lose. If I make this questionable decision, there's a chance it could go our way, but eventually that's going to flip against you as well. So it's a super good point by both you and TK about kind of the psychological impact, because there is you see it sometimes. Football is a really good example of it because of how physically demanding it is on you and how you're getting literally physically beaten when you're getting beaten football, right? Whereas in other sports that's not really the case, but you do see it sometimes in other sports where you just see it in their eyes that they don't want to be there anymore. And that's one of the most dramatic things to do to an opponent.
Yep. I think, you look at the physical sports. You see it in boxing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, 100% in boxing.
You see it in boxing where sometimes you get to round 7 and 8 and you can see it in the guy who's losing that he doesn't want to be there anymore.
He's just like, I have to get up again? You sure you don't want to throw in the towel? I need to keep doing this?
You see it in basketball in a different way whenever a team just starts raining in threes.
Yes.
You definitely see the look in the eyes, the shoulders slump, and you go, oh, this team's beaten. It's over. Like they just went on a 2-minute run where they knocked home 4 threes. The end of the first half, Nebraska basketball against Indiana in the Big Ten.
Oh, yeah.
Is the biggest example where, I think of it in recent memory, we just go, that team's done for.
You used to see it with Golden State all the time when they were kind of in their heyday. They would go on these 4 to 6 minute runs, and the game would go from tied to over in less than half a quarter, and the other team's just like, what happened? It's almost like a shell shocked in basketball because it happens so fast, right?
Mm-hmm. But the difference in football is that, I especially look at teams that run the football. I know it's a different conversation that we're having, but we used it as an example. Teams that run the football, Nebraska back in the 90s, Michigan over the last couple of seasons, you see defensive linemen, as you talk about, the game starts getting away from you. You start realizing, oh, man, they can just do this all game. Defensive linemen start shooting gaps. Linebackers start shooting gaps. Guys start playing beyond their own means, and you start seeing those big holes start to open up.
It starts to be gashes, right? Instead of being like, hey, we're just going to run for 4 yards every time, and there's nothing you can do about it, to they kind of get desperate, kind of like we were talking about the quarterbacks, right? They get desperate. They start taking risks that they know they probably shouldn't, but feel like they have to. And all of a sudden, that 4-yard run turns into a 12-yard run, or that 8-yard run turns into a 20-yard run. And then you've got people just housing it on you, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I'm getting flashbacks to Melvin Gordon against Nebraska.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. When like literally exact that and the long run against Iowa at the end of the game last year. Mm-hmm. Those were the ones where I was like, there's a couple times there where you get desperate because you don't feel like you can beat them straight up, mm-hmm. right? That's what it comes down to, is if you don't feel like you can beat this person straight up, then you take risk that put you and everybody else in a compromised position. And long term, that never works. It might work for a play, but it never works long term.
God, I love this here from Thomas. Football is a game of will, especially along the line of scrimmage. Who can destroy the other man's will?
100%.
Yep.
You see a look in people's eyes where they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's the thing more than anything else. You want to talk about, you want to talk about 90s Nebraska football. That is the thing more than anything else. By the end of the games, nobody wanted to be there anymore against Nebraska, including guys like Warren Sapp, who's one of the best defensive tackles in history, right? Go back and watch that Orange Bowl. The dude's literally on oxygen. He's got an oxygen tank most of the fourth quarter. And you can see it in his eyes when he has to go back out there. I think there was a quick change turnover at one point in the fourth quarter, and you can see it in his eyes. He does not want to go back out there. And that is and when you're the other team, you see it in their. If I can see it on TV, the offensive line 100% can see it, and that's when you know you've got them.
There's this great comment I saw. It was a Nebraska option play against Oklahoma that was making the rounds from Coach Dan Casey on Twitter.
Yep.
And one of the guys in the comments was like, I played against this team back in the early 80s. I played at UNLV. They played us, and I think it was 81, he said. Like, he was like, I was a second-string D lineman. I was rotating in. And I realized we were beaten whenever there were backup offensive linemen coming in and still driving me into the dirt. He's like, it's 115 people on the sideline, and you think maybe you get to the backups and it'll be better. Nope. Backups come in and they're still absolutely crushing us, and that's when I knew we were beat.
It is not any better.